Okay, so ready to really dig into regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Specifically, we're focusing on chapters 3.1 through 3.3 of the Introduction to Regenerative Agriculture Handbook. We're going deep,
Deep dive.
a deep dive into how these practices actually work. Buckle up.
I think you'll find it fascinating. It's about moving beyond just sustaining and actually revitalizing the land.
Right.
We're going to uncover how these practices, from crop rotation to livestock integration, can transform a farm from a resource extractor into a force for positive change.
You know, it's funny. We often hear about sustainable this or eco-friendly that, but what does it really mean to heal the earth through agriculture? That's what I'm hoping to uncover.
Absolutely. And one of the foundational pillars of regenerative agriculture is understanding the power of diversity, which brings us to chapter 3.1, crop rotation and polycultures.
Right. I was reading about ancient civilizations using these techniques. Imagine indigenous communities thousands of years ago already practicing intercropping and polyculture.
What's incredible is they intuitively grasped a concept that science is now confirming. See, monoculture, where you plant vast fields of a single crop, disrupts the natural balance. It's like an all-you-can-eat buffet for pests and diseases.
Well, it's not just about variety for variety's sake.
Yeah.
There's a real ecological reason behind it.
Exactly. Polyculture, on the other hand, mimics the biodiversity of natural ecosystems. You got different plants growing together, each with its own unique set of needs and defenses. This makes the entire system more resilient.
Like if one crop gets hit by a pest, the others might be resistant and keep the whole system going.
Precisely. And it goes beyond pest control. Remember the Three Sisters method we talked about?
Yeah.
Native Americans planting corn, beans, and squash together.
Right. The corn stalks provide support for the beans. The beans fix nitrogen in the soil, and the squash leaves act as a living mulch. Amazing how it all works together.
It's a perfect example of how polyculture maximizes resource utilization. Each plant contributes something unique, creating a self-sustaining micro-ecosystem. And this in turn translates to healthier soil, less need for synthetic fertilizers, and ultimately more nutritious food for us.
See, this is what I mean by getting into the nitty-gritty. It's not just about doing something because it sounds nice. There's a real science and history behind these practices.
Speaking of working with nature, that brings us to chapter 3.2, agroforestry and permaculture. Ever heard of a food forest?
I have. Sounds almost magical, like something out of a fairy tale.
It's pretty remarkable. Imagine walking through a multi-layered edible landscape with fruit and nut trees towering above, shrubs and vines weaving through, and a colorful carpet of herbs and vegetables below.
That's agroforestry in action, right?
Exactly. It's about integrating trees and shrubs into farming systems. It's not just about the food they produce, but the benefits they bring to the entire ecosystem.
Like how?
Take the Inga Alley cropping system, for example. Farmers in the tropics plant rows of Inga trees, a nitrogen-fixing species, alongside their crops.
So the Inga trees are basically acting like natural fertilizer factories.
They are. And they do so much more. Their shade helps suppress weeds, their deep roots improve soil structure, and they even create habitat for beneficial insects that control pests.
Wow, it's a whole system working together. And it's not just some experimental thing. It's actually helping communities become more resilient, especially in areas prone to drought.
Precisely. Now, if agroforestry is about integrating trees into farms, permaculture takes it a step further. It's about designing entire systems that are self-sufficient and sustainable. Think of it as a philosophy for living in harmony with nature.
Okay, so it's not just about what you plant, but how you design the whole space, right?
Exactly. Permaculture principles can be applied to everything from a small backyard garden to an entire community.
Right.
It's about observing natural patterns and using them to create systems that are both productive and regenerative.
I can see how that would be really appealing to someone who wants to live more sustainably but doesn't know where to start.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a way to bring those regenerative principles into our everyday lives.
You know, it's amazing how these regenerative practices like agroforestry and permaculture can transform a farm from just a place that produces food into this thriving, diverse ecosystem.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of everything. And that brings us to a topic that might surprise some people: livestock integration. It's chapter 3.3 in the handbook.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks associate livestock, particularly cattle, with environmental damage, not healing.
That's understandable given conventional practices. But in a regenerative system, livestock are not the enemy. They're actually a key part of the solution.
Okay, I'm really curious to unpack this. How do cows go from destroyers of the land to becoming, well, regenerators?
It all comes down to understanding their role in natural ecosystems. Think about the vast herds of grazing animals that roamed the earth for millennia. Their movement, their grazing their waste, it was all part of a natural cycle that maintained healthy grasslands.
So it's not the cows themselves, it's how we manage them.
Precisely. Regenerative grazing practices aim to mimic those natural patterns. Instead of keeping cattle confined to a small area, we move them frequently, just like a wild herd would do.
And that's what's called rotational grazing.
Exactly. It gives the grazed areas time to rest and regenerate. The cattle's hooves aerate the soil, their manure acts as natural fertilizer, and their grazing stimulates plant growth.
So they're not just eating grass, they're actually helping it grow back stronger.
They are. And by carefully managing the grazing, we can actually increase plant diversity, improve soil health, and even sequester carbon.
Whey cows can help fight climate change.
They can. Healthy soil is a massive carbon sink. By increasing the organic matter in the soil through regenerative grazing, we can actually draw down carbon from the atmosphere.
That's amazing. I'm starting to see how livestock can be integrated into a system that benefits both the land and the climate. But what about the animals themselves?
Well, being of the livestock is crucial in a regenerative system. We're not talking about factory farming here. The animals are raised on pasture-free to move and graze naturally.
So it's a win-win for the environment, the animals, and ultimately for us as consumers.
Exactly. Now, going beyond simple rotational grazing, there's something called holistic management. It takes a much broader perspective, considering the whole farm as a single living system.
So it's not just about managing the cattle, it's about managing the entire ecosystem.
Right. It takes into account everything from water cycles to soil health to wildlife habitat, even the social and economic well-being of the farmer and their community.
Okay, that's a lot to consider.
It is, but the benefits are enormous. Holistic management leads to increased biodiversity, better water retention, healthier livestock, and even higher quality produce.
It really does tie back to that idea of interconnectedness that we were talking about. Everything affects everything else.
Exactly. And by understanding these connections and working with nature instead of against it, we can create a truly regenerative system.
You know, it's interesting, even though we're talking about specific practices, I'm getting this sense of a bigger picture, a different way of thinking about agriculture.
I think that's the key takeaway here. Regenerative agriculture is not just a set of techniques, it's a philosophy, a way of seeing the world. And it's a powerful tool for addressing some of the biggest challenges we face.
Yeah, it really does feel like a whole new way of looking at things.
It is, and it makes you realize that even something as seemingly simple as how we manage livestock can have ripple effects throughout the entire ecosystem.
It's like we've been looking at things with blinders on.
Yeah.
Focused on individual parts instead of the whole.
And that shift in perspective from fragmentation to wholeness is at the heart of regenerative agriculture.
Well, I'm definitely feeling a shift in my own perspective after this deep dive.
I'm glad to hear that. It's exciting to see more and more people embracing this way of thinking. After all, regenerative agriculture isn't just about farming, it's about creating a more sustainable and resilient future for everyone.
And that's what I love about it. It's not just theoretical, it's practical. It offers real solutions to some of the biggest challenges we face, from climate change to food security.
Absolutely. You know, it's funny. For centuries, we've been trying to control and dominate nature. Regenerative agriculture is about recognizing that we are part of nature and working with its inherent intelligence instead of against it.
That's a powerful thought. And it makes me wonder, what's next for regenerative agriculture? Where do we go from here?
That's the exciting part. It's still a relatively young movement. There's so much room for innovation and growth. We're seeing incredible advancements in areas like soil microbiology, water management, and even the use of technology to monitor and enhance regenerative practices.
So it's not just about going back to the old ways. It's about combining ancient wisdom with modern innovation.
Exactly. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Each farm, each ecosystem is unique. The key is to adapt these principles and practices to specific contexts.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into regenerative agriculture, what's the biggest takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with?
I hope they'll come away with a sense of hope, a feeling that we have the power to create positive change. Regenerative agriculture is not just a way to grow food, it's a way to heal the planet, to nourish communities, and to build a more sustainable future.
Well said. And if our listeners want to learn more, what resources would you recommend?
Of course. The Introduction to Regenerative Agriculture Handbook is an excellent starting point. There are also numerous organizations like the Rodale Institute and the Savory Institute doing amazing work in this field. And don't underestimate the power of simply observing nature, learning from the patterns and processes that have sustained life on Earth for millennia.
I love that. It's a reminder that the answers are often right in front of us if we just take the time to look.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe some of our listeners will be inspired to start their own regenerative journey, whether it's a backyard garden or a full-fledged farm.
I have a feeling we've planted some seeds today. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into regenerative agriculture. It's been an eye-opening experience.
The pleasure was all mine. And remember, the future of agriculture is in our hands. Let's choose to regenerate.